In this video, we're exploring two caving gone wrong incidents. In the first one, experienced caver Edward Martin faced unexpected challenges in the treacherous screaming Willies of Sloan's Valley Cave. What dangers did he encounter? In the second, Boy Scout Reilly Walker took a wrong turn into the perilous hellhole passage of Fort Stanton Cave. How did a simple mistake turn into a life-threatening ordeal? Join us as we delve into these gripping tales of adventure, danger, and survival. Before we dive into the video, I want to take a moment to thank all of you who have subscribed to this channel. Our subscriber rate has grown from 8% to 13%, which is truly amazing. If you're new here, simply click the subscribe button, like this video, and hit the bell icon to stay updated on our latest uploads. Now let's get into the video. Sloan's Valley Cave is a little-known cave system in south-central Kentucky. Despite being little-known, the system does have a small community of rabbit fans. Local officials say that visitors in small numbers come every weekend. In fact, there's even a Facebook community called Sloan's Valley Cavers dedicated to the cave system. What makes the cave so special, and why do so few people know about it? It's a question we'll look to answer as we explore the caves together during this video. But I can tell you one thing. In November of 2006, Sloan's Valley Cave was anything but unknown. In fact, it was the site of a horrific accident that brought it attention from some of the world's largest news outlets. But we'll get to that. First, let's learn a bit more about this cave and where it's located. Sloan's Valley Cave is in a pretty rural area. Kentucky's two major cities, Lexington and Louisville, are roughly 100 and 150 miles away, respectively. To get to Sloan Valley, you have to drive down Route 27 and get off the highway somewhere between 10 and 20 miles after you pass through Somerset. Somerset is really the last place along the highway you could reasonably describe as a city. That is, until you eventually cross the border and get to Knoxville, Tennessee, which will take you about another 2 hours. Everything in between, in this roughly 130-mile expanse, is very spread out and mostly forest. The main landmark is the Cumberland River, a major waterway that winds horizontally through the state and provides water for many of the area's residents. So that in itself is one reason why Sloan's Valley Cave so often slips under the radar of the general public. With the exception of about 3 people and maybe a few cows, it's far away. People don't know about it because they simply have no reason to. But another explanation behind the cave's obscurity is the fact that it has such a passionate and small group of fans. Those who know about the cave and treasure it as a beautiful location in nature seem to relish the fact that it is so unknown and so untrammeled by people. Cave enthusiasts worry about vandalism, littering, and other nuisances that would result from the location of the cave becoming common knowledge. While doing the research for this video, I was able to uncover some useful information about the specific area that the cave system is located in, but out of respect for those who want to help preserve the cave, I've decided not to disclose that information here publicly. What I will tell you is that the main entrance to the cave system is located on private property and that it is relatively close to a landfill. That's important, because it means that for decades, the property owners have been having problems with pollution at the site, even without the location getting many visitors. Runoff from the landfill has previously been accused of polluting the waters of Lake Cumberland. In the 1990s, the property owners had a pond on their property tested for contamination, and allegedly tried to pursue legal action against the landfill with little success. Although it appears to be fairly clean and well maintained in the photographs I could find, the main entrance to Sloan's Valley Cave is called the Garbage Pit, which can hardly be a coincidence. But even if the name is inspired by an excess of waste trickling into the cave entrance, there's no way the waste could infiltrate the whole cave. And that's because this cave is huge. Sloan's Valley Cave is a 24-mile system that eventually runs into the Cumberland River. Explorers find room after room after room, all full of stalagmites, stalactites, draperies, columns, seemingly any kind of formation that a caving expert could think of. Many stretches of the cave are also quite dangerous. Perhaps the most dangerous and the one that drew nationwide attention back in 2006 is the stretch called Screaming Willies. It's not exactly clear who Willie is, but it's definitely clear why he would have been screaming. This is a route to exit the cave, and it is 60 feet of almost completely vertical cave wall. Your reward for successfully scaling the wall is daylight, but most prefer to take an alternate route to exit the cave, leaving Screaming Willies for the real daredevils. Treacherous sections like this, along with the marvelous array of visual features, make this cave a hidden gem for those who know how to find it. Sloan's Valley is particularly appealing to experienced cavers who know how to navigate its complex passages and appreciate its structural diversity. Experienced cavers like Edward Martin. When Edward Martin arrived at the entrance to Sloan's Valley Cave in 2006, it wasn't his first time. At 40 years old, Martin had earned himself something of a reputation for exploring dangerous and daunting places such as caves. Martin actually lived more than 2 hours away in Cincinnati, Ohio, but his attraction to the rugged challenge of an underexplored underground cave was enough to draw him across state lines. In November of 2006, a group of 7 people, including Edward Martin, traveled to the remote location where the entrance to Sloan's Valley Cave can be found. Martin probably would have been the leader of the group. Friends later said that he had been coming to the spot regularly for more than a decade. He would have known every nook, every cranny, every tip and trick for navigating your way down and navigating your way back up again. Now, there's something about this story that makes it notably different from most other stories about caving gone wrong. In most stories, there's either some kind of a malfunction with the equipment or some kind of freak accident that the cavers simply would have never expected. But in the case of Edward Martin and the 6 friends who we took to Sloan's Valley Cave, things were different. They made the decision to free climb. In other words, without ropes. In a 24-mile cave system, that's a pretty bold decision. Inside the cave, you are, of course, in total darkness, save for whatever light source you happen to bring. In south-central Kentucky, in a cave that connects to a major river, you're also in the presence of moisture. The cave even experiences regular flooding, and pools of water are a common encounter. So, it's slippery, it's dark, and it's full of steep walls, long drops, and jagged rock formations. I think it's safe to say that relying solely on the support of your own hands and feet in this place demonstrates extreme confidence and familiarity. Edward Martin must have felt that he had been here so many times and knew the cave so well that it would be no problem to casually explore it without strapping in. That proved to be a fatal mistake. The group entered the cave around 3:30 or 4 in the afternoon. Despite what surely must have been some nerve-wracking moments, they were able to successfully explore the cave without ropes for about 2 hours, and they would have had lots to see in that amount of time. After passing through the previously mentioned garbage pit that greets visitors at the cave entrance, cavers descend to reach an enormous space called the lake room. There's an arch in this room high enough for an adult to stand underneath. Crossing this massive room would have been a real challenge without ropes. The floor is usually very silty and it is always steep. Once you traverse the lake room, you move further into the cave towards a distant room called the Oasis. Along the way, you'll see every kind of cave rock formation you can find in a textbook. You also might see bats hanging from the ceiling and albino crawdads swimming in the various pools. 24 miles is more than the distance from downtown Manhattan to past the Bronx. Exploring all of that inside a cave in a single day is quite literally impossible. Martin and his friends seemed content with a casual visit, at least for that day. But as they started making their way back out of the cave, they eventually reached a point of disagreement. 3 people in the group wanted to take the easier route out of the last bit of the cave, which makes particular sense given that they were all working without ropes. But the other 4, including Martin, wanted to brave the 60-foot ascent known as Screaming Willies. Rather than force anyone to go against what they were comfortable with, the group decided they would split up. The 3 would go off and follow the different exit route. Martin and the 3 remaining others would climb up Screaming Willies. Martin volunteered to go last. Now, he may have been the most experienced of the four, so it's possible he did this so as to offer advice and support to the other three who would climb before him. One at a time, they made their harrowing journey up the slope and towards the late afternoon above ground. One at a time, they slowly but surely made it. Finally, all three of Martin's fellow cavers had made it to the top. Martin was now the only person in Sloan's Valley Cave, and the only one left who needed to make the climb. He started making his way up the slope. 60 feet is a long, long way in these conditions. With very little light, no safety harness, and nothing but cold, damp rock formations, it's the equivalent of climbing up a 5 or 6 floor apartment building and trying to get to the roof. The relief of making it is hard to imagine, and probably what drives ambitious cavers to attempt it in the first place. But tragically, Screaming Willies had other plans for Edward Martin that November afternoon. At around 20 or 30 feet up the climb, Edward Martin slipped. All at once he went crashing and tumbling down, hitting rocks along the way, and eventually landed on his head and shoulders against the cave floor. His three friends who were waiting for him at the top must have heard this happen, and it would have been immediately obvious that 911 needed to be called as fast as humanly possible. The local county sheriff's office received a distress call at exactly 6:36 p.m. that evening. From the moment the call was put in, it would be about 3 additional hours before 40-year-old Edward Martin would be pronounced dead. His cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma, which he suffered during the fall. According to the chief deputy coroner, people were known to suffer injuries in Sloan's Valley Cave. Others were known to get lost in its enormous expanse of channels and caverns. But to his knowledge, Edward Martin was the first and only person to have died in the cave. And on the face of it, it seems like there isn't much to unpack in terms of what went wrong here. Martin and his friends were exploring a dangerous cave without the necessary safety equipment, and so, when he slipped on a particularly dangerous section, there was no rope to catch him. But there is another important lesson in this tragic story. Ultimately, there was a reason why Edward Martin and his friends went into this cave without ropes. They were confident they could do it. They, or at least Martin, had been to the cave several times before. It felt familiar to them. And familiarity can sometimes obscure the presence of danger. It's not that prior experience doesn't count for anything, it counts for a lot. Having been to the cave before and having considerable experience with caving in general definitely made the likelihood of Edward Martin having an accident less likely. But the important thing to remember is that it could never have made it impossible. Scaling the 60-foot pass known as Screaming Willies without ropes may be less dangerous if you know what you're doing, but it's still very dangerous. Sadly, Edward Martin encountered the worst possible outcome of that overlooked danger. Having become the site of a horrific death, Sloan's Valley Cave has an aura about it that wasn't there before 2006. Its jagged rock formations and shadowy recesses seem more menacing than perhaps they once did. We can only hope that this unique and relatively unspoiled cave system can remain a place of joy and wonder for the select few who get to visit it, and that no tragedy of such senseless horror will ever strike these passageways again. New Mexico's Boy Scout Troop 108 entered Fort Stanton Cave on a warm morning in June 2003. The cave was challenging, but the first few hours of the trip went smoothly, until the troop took a wrong turn. They didn't realize the route had changed until it was too late. The new route was too difficult, and in their haste to exit the cave, 14-year-old Reilly Walker slipped. Rescuers from across the state joined forces to get him out of the cave, but would they get there in time to save him from his gruesome injuries? Find out as we explore the Fort Stanton Cave rescue. Fort Stanton Cave is located near the Sacramento Mountains beneath the Snowy River Cave National Conservation Area. This park was created back in 2009 to preserve the karst formations of the cave system below ground. In 1855, a group of soldiers found the cave and named it after the nearby military base that was created to defend settlers who were part of the Manifest Destiny movement, which sparked an influx of travelers moving to the West Coast along paths like the Oregon Trail. Fort Stanton Cave is a monstrous cave. In 2019, a team of professionals found 6 miles of new passages deep underground. And just last year, 2 more miles of the cave were surveyed, which makes the cave an astonishing 44.3 miles long. The Fort Stanton Cave system contains the largest continuous cave formation in the world, the white calcite layer formed on the riverbed of the Snowy River Passage. Despite having a world record, the cave still has more secrets for splunkers to uncover. Cavers still haven't reached a terminal point of the cave. Without an end in sight, cavers from all over the world continue to run scientific expeditions to uncover what lies in the shadows of Fort Stanton Cave. The cave's unique history and challenging interior made it the perfect place for the Boy Scouts to test their mettle. The team entered the first gate at Fort Stanton and were immediately faced with some choices. The scout leaders already mapped their journey, but the team could go into Hellhole number 2, they could go down the winding Bat Cave, left into the Hell of 1,000 Pinches, or forward into the deeper cave. They ignored these side passages and passed by Russell's Crawl as well as they entered the main corridor. The first miles of the cave have low-hanging ceilings, forcing the team of novice cavers to crawl on their hands and knees or on their stomachs through tight claustrophobic tunnels. Traversing around rough corners, the team braced themselves for upcoming steep, muddy slopes that could easily cause a fall. The kids with lighter body weights could almost slide down the slopes without much trouble, but the adults had to balance their weight to avoid straining their ankles. They reached Devil's Backbone, an area with large boulders they had to navigate around and over top of to continue onward. After another bend, they reached 20 Steps, which splits into another junction. One route takes them through the Big Bend to a loop that leads further into the cave's miles-long maze. The other direction is the more common route, and the route Troop 108 chose to take. Through the Crystal Crawl, the boys met another triangular room. One way led to a large hall, and the other led to the Decoration Passage. The Decoration Passage opened into larger tunnels filled with beautiful karst formations. The group marveled at the cave's wonders and pushed forward to the Rose Bowl room and into a large, collapsed chamber. This breakdown passage connected to the lake room up above, and by maneuvering through the rubble, the team reached the lower breakdown passage to continue their journey. This breakdown passage connected to the lake room up above, and by maneuvering through the rubble, the team reached the lower breakdown passage to continue their journey. This area required some tricky maneuvering down wet rocks and through narrow squeezes with sharp edges. Thankfully, the boys were small enough to fit through the constricted tunnels without much trouble. Next, they encountered the Keyhole Gate. Park officials imply that they added multiple gates at different distances to prevent cavers from wandering down unexplored passages, though some have speculated these barred passages lead to secretive compounds used by the military fort above ground. After all, the first nuclear detonation in history was the Trinity test conducted at New Mexico's own Alamogordo Range. And following the 1963 Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, all nuclear tests had to be conducted underground to limit the spread of radioactive dust through the air. The boys didn't know about these dark conspiracies, so they kept exploring, none the wiser. The scouts climbed past the Keyhole Gate and the Platter Room into yet another large chamber with stunning rooms extending from all directions. From the Hall of Velvet, the troop could access some of Fort Stanton's most famous formations, including the Sand Passage, the Gypsum Hall, and the Helictite Hall. They made it to this area in the early afternoon. After taking notes and quizzing each other on the crystals and strange formations in the cave, the team turned around to head home. But that's when their happy adventure turned into a hellish nightmare. Just past the Keyhole Gate in the three-way hill room, the team took the wrong path. Instead of walking through the trophy room into the lower breakdown passage, they took a right and went into Satan's Shoe Fly and the Hell Hole. The Hell Hole is a 1,700-foot-long, narrow passage that can easily trap unskilled adult cavers. The adults realized they took a wrong turn because nothing in the cave had been this difficult, but they continued pushing forward. This passage had tight crawls that exit into steep drops with mud at the bottom, essentially death traps for any unskilled cavers, and nearly everyone here was unskilled. 14-year-old Reilly Walker was slowly climbing down one of the tunnels in the hellhole when his foot slipped. Parts of the passage were so tight, people could let go, and the walls of the cave would pin them in place. In order to progress, they'd have to push themselves down. But here, the tunnel opened up just enough to let him slide straight down. He wasn't even close to the bottom. Reilly bounced around the side of the rocky tube and fell 20 feet straight down. The scout troop was well prepared for the journey, and Walker was decked out in all the right gear to tackle the cave's difficult challenges. But knee and elbow pads wouldn't save him from this fall. The thick padding of his clothes couldn't stop the rocks from slicing his skin as he fell through the tunnel. After crashing to the floor, his fellow scouts and the leaders rushed to him. His nose was smashed, his ankle was twisted, he had cuts on his face, hands, and up his arms, and his leg had a huge gash. His friends reeled at the sight. They could see the fibers of his muscles frayed beneath his skin, and blood so red it looked black as it flowed from the wound. Half the team split to go back down Satan's Shoofly and out through the way they came. They'd get help while the rest of the team stayed with Walker. The team with Walker quickly tried to constrict his leg by wrapping clothing around his thigh. This would hopefully slow the bleeding, but it could damage his nerves, and it wasn't guaranteed to save him. The rest of the team found a gate and reached the surface. The park team gave the scouts a paper with contact info in case of an emergency. If the team called the police, the dispatch would have to call cave rescue teams. Calling these numbers would cut out the middleman. After calling multiple numbers, local first responders arrived at Fort Stanton's entrance below the nearby road. Police, firefighters, and paramedics all arrived along with volunteers from a local caving club that knew Fort Stanton like the back of their hands. Roughly 2 hours after the accident, the first rescuers reached Walker. But the rescue was far from over. He was lying on the cold, hard surface of the cave around 2 miles from the entrance. The rescuers thought he was in the easy passages. Getting him out through the hellhole would be difficult. The first rescuers split up. Some stayed to wait for medics to arrive, and others left Walker to contact state agencies and the Southwestern Regional Coordinator to initiate a full-scale rescue. The coordinator was now in charge of saving Walker's life. He called multiple cave rescue teams all across New Mexico. People left their jobs and ran to their cars to speed across the highway and rescue the fallen scout. An hour after Walker was located, the medics reached him. They gave him painkillers and cut away the ripped cloth that was stuck to his open wounds. They cleaned the cuts with antibiotics and rubbing alcohol and tried to stop the bleeding by applying a tourniquet. Outside, the coordinator split the rescuers into teams. One team would bring equipment and supplies into the cave to aid the medics, give food to the rescuers, and provide the rescuers with anchors and ropes needed for the extraction. Another team was tasked with laying telephone wires so that the team could communicate using rugged, military-grade field phones. The third team would actually rig the lines needed to bring Walker out of the cave, since he couldn't walk with his injuries. Each team contained 6 caving experts, and after 3 hours of work, 3 more teams were added to the mix. Over 50 rescuers came to save the Boy Scout from Fort Stanton Cave. There was no flood or breakdown yet, but the rescuers were still racing against time to save Walker. His blood loss could easily lead to permanent injuries, or even death. New Mexico has a hot, dry climate, but the tunnels below ground can get extremely cold. Temperatures in Fort Stanton Cave average around the lower 50s. That might not sound too bad. Walking outside for a few minutes in that weather is no problem for most people, but hours of unrelenting exposure wears down even the toughest spirits. Plus, the human body doesn't have to be below freezing for it to freeze to death. Although the rescue was a textbook example of what rescuers needed to do in these high-pressure situations, they were still taking way too long to save him. A little after midnight, the crew had rigged enough line to attempt the next step of the rescue. They had to get Walker out of the hellhole. Rescuers wrapped Walker in a rugged stretcher with solid backs and sides so that the rocks wouldn't cut into him as the stretcher slid along the jagged floor. Rescuers started pulling the ropes, and Walker's stretcher scraped along the narrow tunnels. Hours later, at 2 a.m., the stretcher emerged from the hellhole. The crews reapplied the pain meds and fixed his wounds again, but the rescue wasn't over yet. The rescuers attached the Boy Scout to new ropes and hooked their own harness to the stretcher. Rescuers lined the sides of the stretcher and held onto it for dear life. In unison, they each stood up with the stretcher and began walking him through the open tunnels of the cave. It took the team 5 more hours to reach the first gate, but by 7:30 a.m., 15 hours after the accident, Walker made it out of Fort Stanton Cave. He was loaded into an ambulance, and he later recovered from his injuries. Fort Stanton Cave is now closed to the public, and even novice cavers can't gain entry. If you found yourself lost deep below ground, miles from the exit, would you keep pushing forward, or would you turn around? How would you even know which way you were going? Tell us how you'd tackle these problems in the comments section. If you want to see more videos like this one, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more spine-tingling stories of life and death.